Good afternoon. I am Barbara Buffkin, Chair of the International Board of Governors of the Insurance Industry Charitable Foundation. And may I welcome over 1,000 of you to the IICF Women's Insurance Conference Series Live Dialogue for Diversity. We have 4 tremendous speakers and the pace will be fast and I'm sure inspiring. 4 months ago, the thought of our Women's Insurance Conference Series being virtual was not even a glimmer of an idea. And while we are all unsure of what reentry from COVID will look like, our 4 regional events in the fall will take place either in a technology-enhanced experience or possibly even in person. What a wonderful thought. Bringing over 1,000 together today with an open invitation to join us would not have happened without the generosity of Amwins and EY and all of our conference series sponsors. Our sincerest thanks. While the pandemic still grips the world and we continue to navigate COVID-19 and sheltering in place, the events of the last few weeks have also stunned us. We have witnessed or joined with our leadership, our employees, our neighbors and friends, courageously voicing demands for change and social justice in an effort to assure equality. The whole world is talking about matters of race, spoken and felt deeply and without compromise. Our conversations on inclusion are not just championed in the confines of the boardroom and in the C-suites. They are, in fact, happening in the streets. As champions of inclusion, we feel the call to work more and harder for immediate and sustainable change. When we listen and learn from each other, we can better define opportunities within our industry for many. Together, we can be a force for change that creates a more equitable environment for all. Let us find the courage to promote the intentional and purposeful change we need. It goes without saying our world has changed dramatically in the last few months. However, what should not go unsaid is the thanks we owe to the professionals and their commitment within the insurance industry, our colleagues who have risen to meet these unprecedented challenges, including those that are feeding the children in crisis, struggling with food insecurity during COVID. And all of us who know our work in diversity and inclusion needs a real restart. It is our sincere hope that the IICF events like Dialogue for Diversity Live demonstrate the authenticity of our commitment to furthering the principles of diversity and inclusion. And together we can and we will change our industry and beyond. Thank you for being together today.
Hi everyone, my name's Mia Lorick and I'm an attorney with RMWBH Law. And as you know, I'm here to talk about how change starts in the mirror. This is intended to be a discussion to highlight what we can personally do to affect change. I'll tell you admittedly that it's not
Hi everyone, my name's Mia Lorick.
Fuzzy and give you
and I'm an attorney.
That the conversation is going to be a little uncomfortable.
Me with Arm
because
talk
it's
about
my
how
belief
change
that in
starts
order
in the mirror.
to affect change,
This is intended to be a
get
discussion
to
highlight what
hear
we can
things
personally
that
do
you may not
to
want
affect
to hear.
change.
But it's my
I'll tell
hope
you admittedly
that
that
when
it's
you
not
leave
going to
you'll
be
have ideas,
warm and fuzzy and
thoughts,
give you
and
warm
a desire
feels
to
all
be a
over.
voice of leadership within your organization. Now, I've attended a lot of diversity and inclusion conferences. I've read a lot of articles, I've read a lot of books, and one of the common themes in those conferences is that you need to have male allies so that you can express how you feel and they can affect change in the organization. Or that you need to inform your C-suite and promote people into the C-suite that know about diversity and inclusion so that we can affect change? Well, yes, and I agree with all of those statements. Those are all very important to your organization. But I also believe that some of the problems within our organizations is because of you. Some of you right now are the reason that we don't have equality in some of our organizations to the extent that we should. And I don't mean that to say that anything you've done has been intentional or malicious or done with an ill spirit. I mean that to say that it may be unconscious, that we all have experiences, beliefs, we've had challenges, we have opinions that shape who we are as people. And in that, it's natural to project that onto other people, even when we don't intend to. And so what I mean by that is that how you affect change in your organization requires that you put those opinions, those personal beliefs, and those experiences to the side sometimes and realize that not everyone has the same experiences as you do. You may be asking what I'm talking about, and so I'll give you an example. Maybe you're a woman who's had a baby, and you had your baby and you said, I want to take the full amount of maternity leave and I want to go part-time after the 3 months so that I have the most time with my child because I really value family time over work. And that's great. You went home, you had a great experience, you're back at work, but you were 3 months out and you were 3 months part-time. And now let's fast forward to 6 years later, 8 years later, 10 years later, and you're at a decision-making table. And you're thinking about somebody within your organization for a promotion or for a special project. And you're sitting there and you're looking at the names of the people and you're thinking who would be perfect for this promotion or for this project. And you say, well, you know, Rebecca really fits everything that we need for this position, but, you know, she's 8 months pregnant and she's not going to want to take on that extra work. She's going to want to have time with her baby at home. So I'm going to look at John instead because I already know what it's like to have a baby and Rebecca's not going to want that. And maybe you do that without ever having a conversation with Rebecca. That's not malicious. Actually, it's you probably being sensitive to some of the things that Rebecca may be going through. But within our organizations, we owe it to that person to have a conversation, to ask them what they want, what they expect out of the position, if they want that responsibility, or if they'd rather be considered for the next opportunity that presents itself. And maybe you're sitting there and you're saying, well, Mia must not have children because if she had children, she would understand that, you know, you just need to be at home. Well, I will tell you that I have a daughter, Scotland, and she's 4 years old. And when I was about 7 months pregnant with her, I was preparing for a trial. And a few of my partners at my law firm, who were my bosses, they sat me down and they said, look, we know you're 7 months pregnant. This trial could be a lot of work. We don't want to put too much on you. Do you think that this is something that you can handle? Because we can have somebody else step in. It's no ding to you. We just want to make sure that you're okay. Or you can handle it just like nothing's going on and you just tell us if you need a break or that sort of thing. But I was given the option and I handled that trial and it was one of the greatest experiences of my career. But had I just been replaced without ever being asked, it may have been detrimental to my career and it may not have given me the experience that I need to then handle later cases. And so what I'm saying to you is to make sure that you're at least giving women or these employees the opportunity to have that conversation and that you're not being a roadblock for them unintentionally. Now, maybe you're not the decision maker and you're the person sitting at the table while these decisions are being made. You also have a responsibility to speak up when those conclusions or decisions are being made without further consideration. Sitting at that table gives you the opportunity to say, hey, wait a minute, why don't we ask her what she wants? Why don't we find out what her plan is when she goes out for maternity leave to find out what it is she wants? Or wait a minute, why are we assuming that somebody who has 3 children under 3 doesn't want to be on this project? It's all about having open discussion and realizing that not everyone is the same, because that's the first step to making sure that we really have an inclusive environment. Now, speaking up also requires that you speak up not just when it's comfortable, but that you speak up in situations when it's uncomfortable, when you may ruffle feathers. And a lot of us, myself included, have sat in conversations, we've sat in meetings where things that are inappropriate are said. Maybe it's a comment about a woman saying, oh, she's hot, or I'd really like to work with her because she's so pretty, or she has big boobs, or I don't know what it is. But we've all sat there and we've said nothing because we don't want to speak up. We don't want to be perceived as if we're not one of the guys, if we're have that in. And so what I'm saying to you is when those comments are made, when those racially insensitive jokes are being made, you owe it to yourself to speak up and say, this isn't okay. And I don't fault you because I've been in that situation. I've been the person who said, I don't want to say anything. I don't know how this is going to be perceived. But now's the time to change that. Now's the time to say, I'm going to be the person that speaks up no matter what. Now, there's also the group that doesn't have a seat at the table, the group that, is in the first 1 to 5 years of their career. They're not in the meetings, they're not at the decision-making tables, and you're probably sitting there and you're saying, yep, tell them, Mia, tell them how they need to change the organization. But I'm also talking to you, okay? I'm talking to you because we owe it to ourselves, no matter what level we are at within the organization, to speak up and affect change. And how does this present itself if you're not in the decision-making room? You still have a voice. Your voice isn't silent. And sometimes it's not about speaking up on a big issue. Sometimes it's about checking yourself and saying, well, wait a minute. I'm not being as cordial or as inclusive of this other woman or this other minority or this person with a disability as I should be. It's saying, wait a minute, maybe I've pulled up the ladder. Maybe I'm a third year in my organization and I'm not properly mentoring the people that are within their first year or the people that are interning, and looking at it that way. Maybe instead of complaining and sitting there and saying the organization doesn't have this, it doesn't have that, figuring out a way to make it happen. When I was a first-year lawyer, and even before being hired at my law firm, I looked at our firm's website and I noticed that we didn't have a diversity and inclusion statement, and a lot of law firms that I was looking at did. And I remember sitting there and talking to some friends and kind of saying, well, that must mean that, they don't really value diversity and they don't really value inclusion. And I started working at the firm and it was quite the opposite. The firm was very diverse. There were always discussions about diversity and inclusion and what we could do and how we could implement policies. It was just that I guess nobody had really taken the time to write something out or put it on the website. The website was kind of evolving at the time. And so as a first-year lawyer, I drafted it. I said, I'm going to draft something that reflects the climate that I see within the firm, and I'm going to propose it to the equity partners, and I may never get a response, but at least I'm doing something other than complaining. I proposed it, and within 30 seconds of me hitting send on the email, I got a call from our managing partner who said, this is amazing. We're rolling it out on the website. We want you to direct the program. We want you to be in charge of it. This is exactly the leadership that we're looking for. And I've really never looked back as far as speaking up or feeling like I was too junior to speak up and make those decisions. So as you go forward, I want you to understand that no matter what your role is, we're talking receptionist, intern, all the way up to the C-suite. You can do things that affect change within the organization. Now, one of the other areas that a lot of women are hesitant sometimes to speak up in is during like an annual review negotiation type setting. And I've talked to a lot of women and they come out of that review and they're like, you know what, I didn't get the money I wanted, and it's because I'm a woman, and it's because of this, and it's because of that. And what I'm saying to you is that there could be those sentiments and there could be some of that happening in that review, but make sure that you've done everything you need to do to be prepared. Make sure that you go in and you speak up, that you advocate for what you want, that you go in with raw numbers about why you should get paid what you should get paid, or why you're the best person for the promotion. Only then, when you know that you've done every single thing that you can to advocate for yourself and for other people within the organization, can you look at those other reasons and maybe say some of this is at play. But we have to stop putting the blame on other people and putting the fault in hands when we have a responsibility to ourselves and to others coming up behind us to make sure that we affect change. So as you sit here, my goal is for you to ask yourself, is there something that you can do today, tomorrow, next week, no matter how small, that affects change? Is there something that you've done in the past where you've judged somebody, that you've voiced an opinion or didn't voice an opinion that you shouldn't have, or that you should have? If that's the case, then I ask you to go into all situations with a little bit more pause, with a little bit more thought, and say, is there another way to look at this? Is there another way to handle this? I want all of us to sit here and to be the change that we want to see, be the change that we ask for repeatedly at these diversity conferences. And I'll leave you with this. One of my favorite quotes is from Sheryl Sandberg, and it says, "We cannot change what we are not aware of, but once we're aware, we cannot help but change." Everyone, look in the mirror and ask yourselves, is there something that I can do within myself to better change how equality and diversity is happening within my organization? And I submit to you all that as you go out into the world, as you return to your organizations and you turn off this video, that you implement that change, and you will be surprised at the results that we will get. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Mia Lorick, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this talk.
Hi, I'm Pascal Finet, the co-founder of Be Radical, and in the next 10 minutes, I will take you on a trip into the future.
The co-founder of Be Radical, and in the next 10 minutes, I will take you.
Now, here's the interesting thing. If you're feeling a little bit like my feline friend over here, so you're getting ready to jump, you're taking in all the information you have learned, everything you know, everything you're reading today, everything you're learning today, and you're getting ready to jump just one more bit of information, and if you're feeling a bit like that, fret not. That is my normal state, particularly in this new crazy time. But here's the most important thing I can tell you about the world. Tomorrow will look dramatically different than today. And I used to say this for years and years now, and people kind of like smiled about this, but now I do think we're all feeling it very acutely. There's these 3 time horizons, the now, next, and beyond. Our friends from EYQ over at EY, the think tank there, have framed this in this beautiful language. Now, here's what's happening right now. The now and the next collapse into a single point in time. There is no 2 time horizons anymore. And the beyond, which used to be beyond 5 or 10 years, is now the world beyond COVID-19. That opens up really interesting opportunities because technology moves on an exponential curve. We know this. Computing is a good example for that. Adoption is typically lagging behind. And now we're seeing something we call the C19 bump, this massive explosion in adoption. The sheer fact that you don't see me in person, but watch this as a video is a good example for that. The New York Times used the words BC and AC, and of course, BC is the time before COVID-19. AC is the world after COVID-19. Here's where I get excited about. There's things which will be gone, which we did do in a world before COVID, which are not real anymore in this new world. And there will be new behaviors. Think about, for example, wearing a face mask. But there also will be behaviors which are changed. And the interesting question, and this is where the opportunities lie for me, is what are the things which are going to change? What are the things which are new? What are the things which are gone? And what is the residue of those as they're moving from BC to AC? And I want to give you a framework to understand this much better. We start out with this one here. What you see here is a good example of why we are really ill-equipped to see the thing I'm going to talk about in a minute. What you see here is mobile phone or digital media usage. The red bar says mobile phones, blue is PC, laptops, white is other internet connected devices, 2008, 2018. Now here's the interesting insight. Of course, this is exponential growth, as we all know. But more importantly, imagine I would have shown you that slide in the year 2008, and all you could see is the data for 2008. Now, who truthfully would have said, looking at the data, I believe the world is going to change? Most of us wouldn't. And I've done this exercise many times. And ask yourself this simple question. When in this timeline would you have thought the world is going to change? Mobile is taking over. And the median answer we get from all around the world is the single one all the time, 2012. Now, here's the interesting thing. When you look at when some of the most interesting companies were born, which leverage mobile at their core, Airbnb 2008, Uber 2009, WhatsApp 2009, Instagram 2010, and the list goes on and on and on. The important bit is this. We would have missed these companies not by 3 months, we would have missed them by 3 years. We need to get really good at reading what we call weak signals. And we're living in a world which is abundant in weak signals, which shows us where the future is going. Classic examples, compute. Computers are becoming so powerful that by 2029, you will buy a $1,000 compute device which has the raw compute power of a human brain. And we do know that computers are doubling in their capacity every 2 years, meaning 2 years later, 2031, you've got 2 human brains, and then 4, 8, 16, and so on. And by 2050, 2060, you've got all of humanity's combined brain power in a single $1,000 compute device. Tomorrow will look dramatically different than today. AI and algorithms, we see this truly exponential growth, of course. But when you look at the data, it's crazy. AI in the last 7 years has become 300,000 times as powerful, and it's currently doubling every 270 days. Energy. All it takes to power the world's energy consumption using a solar panel, and of course this is a theoretical assumption because you would need to transport that energy, is what you see here is a big square. We're living in a world which is abundant in energy, yet we're still fighting wars over fossil fuels, which is crazy. Genetic engineering, same thing. The cost of sequencing a human genome has come down from $2.something billion and 7 years of effort as part of the Human Genome Project in 1999 to less than $1,000, and it's expected to drop by another order of magnitude in the next 5 years, and then it will just go down and down and down. And just think about what the opportunities are. All weak signals, some of them stronger than others, which point towards a very different future. But here's where we get really excited. This is why I think COVID points towards something much bigger, because we now see a lot of new or emerging weak signals. A good example is remote work. Clearly, remote work is with us for a long time, yet most companies don't do it. Now, remote work is here. Most of us are working remotely. Nearly 100% of at least office workers are remote these days. And the question becomes, what are the implications of the implications? Because when you look at weak signals, that is the thing you really need to look at. Because the opportunities, the white spaces, the blue oceans, the green meadows, they're at the further outer edges of those trends. Here's a good example. Remote work. Remote work clearly has direct implications on your people, on your clients, and your resources. Those are what we call the first order implications. Everybody can understand those. But now you're going to ask yourself, what are the implications of that? So for example, the implications on your people is there's some shift in your hiring, without a doubt. That leads to an increase in your remote locations, that leads to an increase in your talent pool. So suddenly you can become much more competitive than you were ever before. There's another thing which is interesting. If you hire remotely, particularly in more rural areas or areas which are economically not quite as developed, your retention actually goes up. So massive opportunities for the companies which not just see remote work as a thing we need to get through, but see remote work as a real opportunity. Here's another example. Your clients, of course, your in-person meetings are going down. We're all having meetings on Zoom and WebEx and God knows what. Your video meetings are going up for sure, but here's a fascinating thing. Your business attire might go down because now suddenly in a video environment, we all feel a little bit more comfortable to be who we are instead of showing up in a suit or a nice dress. What does that mean now? Well, if you're in the business of being a tailor, bad luck. But also your client relationship might go up because now your client doesn't see you as a fully dressed, well-dressed person in a suit or in a dress, but they now see you as a real human being wearing the t-shirt from your alma mater. Last one here, resources. Of course, office space will go down, cost will go down. That is inevitable. You can ask yourself, what does it actually mean if office spaces go down, for example, in our cities, which will get probably revitalized and become more livable again. But also home office use will go up without a question. So now we're already seeing in the market for residential real estate, people buying bigger houses because they now need a home office. There's interesting questions around what do you do with your benefits? So now suddenly companies might think about, do I give you a stipend towards your home office? Here's a really fascinating one. Your IT infrastructure use will go up. Of course, most of that stuff goes into the cloud. We're now using many, many more tools because we're remote. That gives you a little bit more of a cybersecurity risk without a question, because now you've got much more surface area, attack surface area. Cybercrime will go up because there's an attack surface area. And here's the interesting implication of that implication. If cybercrime goes up, I expect that cryptocurrencies will also go up because cybercriminals love to conduct business in cryptocurrencies. So now might be a good time to buy a few Bitcoins to hedge against this new world. When you do this and you do it extensively, it looks like this. We call this a disruption map. And if you're interested, you can go to our website. We have a free online course which teaches you this in detail. Now, the important thing about this is change happens at the implications of the implications, at the third, fourth, and fifth order magnitude of changes out there. And you have to do this. Now, here's the question around what is the residue of all these changes? Again, lots of weak signals will never turn into something, but many, many do. Remote work has an interesting weak signal residue part to it. The median daily commute in San Francisco is about an hour. Now, we're working remote, so suddenly you've got 5 more hours in the day which you don't spend sitting in a car. So now the question for me becomes, what is the residue of this? How many people do want to go back to that, namely sitting in a car for 5 hours? And we already see the data. This is data from a recruitment firm which asked office workers across the United States, and 50% of them said that they want to continue working remotely. So as you're looking at other weak signals we're seeing now in this COVID world, say, for example, food delivery, a thing we seem to be all doing now, contactless payment, contactless anything, the changes in travel, we see it everywhere. So my encouragement for you is start mapping those weak signals, become curious about them, spend time with your teams, your family to figure out what does this weak signal look like and what are the implications of the implications? Because here's the thing, all these weak signals, when they turn into something, it happens gradually and then suddenly. And the companies which see the gradually, they are the ones who will win. Now, we're living in truly extraordinary times. Of course, there's COVID, and I don't want to belittle just 1 second the implications of COVID on humanity, on our families, our societies, both from an economic as well as from a health perspective. But I want to remind you that we do live in the most amazing times ever, because for the first time in human history, you, people, communities, small groups of people have the same innovation power as large corporations and even governments. So it is in our hands to create that future. If you want to be in touch, the simplest way to be in touch with us is if you send an email to this email address, just an empty email. It's a bot. It will reply to you with my personal contact details. We're sharing all our research on a public mailing list. We'll add you to that list. Thank you so much for having me. Create the future and build what matters.
Jen, thank you for joining me today and continuing a conversation we started several months ago about the importance of vulnerability in leadership during the time of crisis.
Hi, how are you? It's great to see you, Megan.
It's great to see you too. And, you know, when we first started this conversation, you were still very new in your role as president of small business, U.S. Retail Property and Casualty Brokerage Division at
Jen,
Gallagher.
thank you for
So
joining
in
me
addition
today
to the notable increase in the scope of your responsibilities,
and continuing.
at that time, you were very focused on establishing human level or emotional connections with your new team of direct reports, as well as with the broader small business team. And then shortly before we had this first conversation, about 90 days into your new role, COVID-19 halted business as usual, and you found yourself immersed in crisis leadership. And I know you had shared with me much of your time initially was focused on the logistics around this, of working remotely, of leading your team and supporting your small business clients whose lives and livelihoods have been threatened by this global pandemic. But also, and from the onset, you were very focused on the well-being of your team, which, as you once described to me as one of your key principles of leadership, gets back to the importance of fostering these emotional connections with your colleagues. So let's talk about that a little bit. How does channeling your vulnerability facilitate this emotional connection, as well as strengthen your leadership during the time of a crisis?
Yeah, so you summarized that very well, Megan. It's been quite the ride. We're here in June now, so I am about 7 months into my new role. And yeah, to say that COVID-19 was a surprise in some way, a leadership surprise, would be an understatement. But truthfully, I think it's been a leadership gift in many ways. Taking on a much broader scope of responsibility in my new role was quite a large leap for me from a leadership standpoint. And I think you go into these roles with a mindset from a business mindset. How are you going to approach the business? How are you going to make your stamp in your new role? And COVID-19 kind of flipped that all on its head. And I remember probably around early April or so saying to someone that everything that I thought was really important 30 days prior was no longer even on my list. Mm-hmm. And the main thing that was on my list as we were moving, I was, working with my team to move 300 people from offices to remote. The main thing on my list was to make sure that everyone was okay. Okay in health, obviously.
Right.
Okay mentally, because we were all dealing with so much uncertainty. And I think we all know that as we watched the news that it was changing what seemed like by the minute. And it was changing for us personally as people who were living in this world where everybody was affected by it. But it was changing business-wise because there was so much uncertainty, and we're watching the unemployment numbers go up and up and up. And, sitting back as a leader, to me, it was this time where I thought, this is when authentic leadership truly matters. And these are the times that you get to define the difference between good leadership and great leadership. And as someone who really studies leadership and feels a bit of a natural inclination towards it, maybe not a bit, a lot of a natural inclination towards it, for me it was about like, this is the moment you've been waiting for. And I don't mean that in a way of saying that it's some sort of celebratory moment. It's the moment that you get to prove yourself to your people, that you get to show exactly who you are for them to lead them through that crisis. And so, I think some of the things that I leaned on, and I'm still learning, we're all learning, right? One of the things I did, actually, I'll back up and say, one of the first things I did was I signed up for a course through Harvard. They were offering a free virtual course on crisis leadership. And I thought, I kind of go back to how do you balance what you know with the things you don't know? And I realized very quickly that I had never led through a real crisis like this. And I take it very seriously. And I wanted to do the work and really understand how I could properly how I can effectively lead through this. But then on the flip side, there's this human piece of it. And that's where you and I have talked about a lot, which is this human piece that for me was about checking in, making sure that people were okay, making sure that we were being absolutely, and I shouldn't say this is not past tense, this is current day, that we are being as transparent as we possibly can be in a time when things just keep changing. And I think people want answers and they're yearning for their leaders to give them answers. And the truth of the matter is that as a leader, I've felt quite vulnerable because I don't have all the answers to give the team. And so the ability to be able to create a sense of security in such insecure times is a challenge, but you have to navigate it really what feels like almost hour by hour as things change. And as you get more information, continuously communicating that to the team.
Well, and I think, you were already, going through this journey and strengthening and demonstrating your leadership. And then, as we all know, an even graver public health crisis is now at the forefront of all thoughts, conversations, and actions in the wake of George Floyd's brutal murder. And during this pivotal moment of acknowledgement by our country and our communities and our organizations of the devastating effects of systemic racism and social injustice, and this is again against the backdrop and exacerbated by a global pandemic, it has become even more critical than ever to lead and commit to your team's well-being, authentically, as you said, and compassionately and intentionally. So throughout all of this period of time, how has embracing your vulnerability helped you to do so? And how has your vulnerability or how you express your vulnerability changed throughout this period of time?
Yeah, it's sincerely like you saying that to me, that question, I got choked up a bit, thinking about it, because the truth of the matter is that take away being a leader. I mean, we have been rocked by this. The social unrest, the inequality, the injustice that we're seeing all across America. And as a leader, again, going back to making sure that your people are okay. This is not about, for me, coming back that Monday after George Floyd was murdered was hard. It was a hard day because I spent the weekend just as all of us, reading, learning, just contemplating what was my response going to be to my team, because I was really worried about my team, especially the people of color on my team who I know process this in a much more impactful and heavy and grievance way. And to be clear, I think we're all grieving in this time right now. But the ability to be able to come back and say, we're here. I stand with you. I am standing by the fact that I have always been and always will be an inclusive leader. And I'm going to fight harder for that than ever before. I think it's hard, and it's hard in the situation that we are all learning, and I want to do the work. And I want to continue to do that work. And you want to make sure that your team understands that that your team sees you as a role model for what the culture of your team and your organization really should be when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to being anti-racist, when it comes to making sure that we are creating opportunities for everybody, and that we're constantly looking for new ways and better ways to improve our organization. And that really is going to be done and is done through the ability to have a truly diverse and inclusive team. So, you know, to answer your question, I don't have an excellent answer for you. I would tell you that the vulnerability piece of my answer is that we're all working to figure it out. My advice to all leaders is do the work. You have to do the work. I mentioned a couple minutes ago that I took a course through Harvard, you know, when it came to the pandemic. Do the work on this too. This is not something you don't wake up in the morning and know exactly what to do and say. It does not always come naturally. You have to really, truly educate yourself, and we all do. And as white leaders, we absolutely do. And I think that that's an important thing to state, is that we very much have a duty and a responsibility to do that work. And that work is vulnerability in itself.
That's very well said, Jen. And I think, you know, reflects a lot of the sentiments that I have felt, and I've had conversations with others as well, is just doing the work, having the conversations is vulnerable, and so absolutely critical. And I'll close out today's conversation with a quote of yours, from an email you sent to your team on June 1st, but I think it really embodies this sentiment about vulnerability. Let's choose courage over comfort, and let's choose what is right over what is easy. So thank you, Jen, for your time and your candor and your vulnerability today.
Thanks, Megan. Appreciate it.
Guest, and I'm the Southwest Market Leader for ABD. Thank you for being here and for supporting the IICF, who is helping nonprofits and charities meet vital community needs. Just like many of you, my world changed in March when the Centers for Disease Control declared the coronavirus outbreak a pandemic. My mind immediately went to the trailer for the movie Contagion, and I thought about my family, my team, my friends, and how the world would change. Unfortunately, that was not the only crisis we would end up having in front of us. George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and so many more. These names must be spoken. These are senseless deaths that have been the catalyst for protests, demands for police reform, and have been the unfortunate excuse for some taking advantage of the protests with looting and the destruction of property. This is not my first crisis. I was supposed to be in training on the 98th floor of Tower 1 on 9/11. Thankfully, I was not there that morning, but was forever changed as an American, a New Yorker, a Marcia McLennan employee, a colleague, a friend, and part of humanity. I believe that some lessons I learned through the weeks, months, and even years following the attack are worth sharing. First, everyone reacts to and processes information differently in a time of stress or crisis. We're sharing now one version of the Kubler-Ross model. That's my version with the little faces on it, which shows the stages of emotions experienced when there's a shock. As a leader, it's important to allow yourself to feel and process at least the initial elements of the change curve and move along that wavy line as quickly as possible. This will be allowing you to be in the best position to help others around you. It's important to note that some people jump immediately to action and others are completely paralyzed with fear, and there are so many variations in between. The fact is, Everyone is different, and those of us that are action-oriented need to be very empathetic. Let me repeat, very empathetic and supportive of those who are in different stages of the process. It's also important to note that you may get through a stage and then have a step back to a previous stage. This process is not linear, and it's certainly not easy. I learned an important lesson during this time of social unrest. Reaching out to a Black friend to show support and love, I also asked, what can I do? I later apologized for this. In my haste to jump to action, I did not realize that I was asking my friend, who was in a significant amount of pain, to take care of me, when I should have realized that she just needed to take care of herself in that moment. Take time and think about your words and your actions and seek to understand before asking for something. Along with empathy, it's important to stop and think about who might be feeling like an outsider. For example, those who live alone, those who feel their financial concerns are not shared by others, those who are scared and feeling even more isolated during these times. Once you've identified those who might be feeling like an outsider, check in and let them know you really care about their well-being. Listen and ask. Know that as a leader, you are accountable for your team's well-being, whatever that means in your environment. Second, crisis is a great equalizer. I stood at the south-facing windows on the 43rd floor of MMC headquarters and watched the towers come crashing down. It was surreal. It was unbelievable. It was life-ending and life-changing for so many. In the days following the event, I found myself shoulder to shoulder with the mayor of New York City, with first responders, with other individuals from all walks of life unloading supplies at the Armory. There were celebrities, there were those who lost family members, there were New Yorkers. At least for a moment, we were all bound together by a mission and purpose, which was to help family members find their loved ones. In that moment, we were all equal. Especially during a crisis, it's important to remember that we are in this together, which also happens to be one of the guiding principles that ABD established when launching in 2012. I live in San Diego, and thinking about all of the images that showed up in the city of La Mesa, there was, after the protesters, riots, looting, violence. The images that come to mind are of a community that came out with brooms and en masse just to help. And in that moment, everyone with a broom in hand was bound together with a single purpose: to clean up and restore the physical damage from the night before. It does not end there. Don't put the brooms down. Stay in that moment of community. We can do so much more when we're doing it together. Third, we all have hundreds, if not thousands, of choices every day to reach out, to do something kind, to create an experience for someone else. On day 3 after the attack, I was volunteering at the Armory when a package arrived addressed to supervisor. It was from our New Jersey office and contained photos, dental records, and DNA for 7 New Jersey employees that were at One World Trade Center meetings that fateful morning. After calling each family, it was clear that there was no way that any of them were coming into Manhattan to complete the missing persons report, obtain a file number, and be set up in the tracking system. Against the wishes of my employer, I took all of the information and filed the reports for those 7 families. It was the right thing to do. It was not until a year later that I received some humbling news. One of those families credited that report and me facilitating it with getting their loved one back. This blew my mind, as I had made the decision to do something for someone else, never expecting to have that circle back, and certainly not in that way. Think about how many choices you have every single day. You could pay it forward by paying for the person behind you in the Starbucks drive-thru. You could offer to go shopping for your elderly neighbor who's at risk during this time of COVID-19. You could ask the seemingly quiet team member to weigh in on a topic. Sometimes just smiling, that is if you don't have a mask on, can brighten someone else's day. I've even seen people who have smiley faces on their masks, and that's just awesome. Speak up if you see a person not being treated well. Don't let that moment go by. This is a call to action for any of us with white privilege. Our voices matter, and we can drive change. And the best change is going to be moment by moment, experience by experience. Lead by example, and others will follow you. Model the behavior you want to see, and it will happen. There are so many simple acts of kindness that we can all do, and most don't cost a dime. Imagine how powerful it would be if every single person who sees this were to do just one or one more kind thing every single day. Lastly, find something to ground your perspective. This is my license plate. It's a 9/11 memorial plate, and because I'm a little backwards, you'll have to read this backwards to understand. I'll give you a couple seconds to see if you can get it. Okay, from right to left, it's be grateful. I know my time could have easily been done on 9/11. Seeing my license plate reminds me of that. Hearing the F-18s training overhead here in San Diego reminds me of that. If we did not experience difficult things, the smaller challenges would seem bigger, the tough days tougher, the things we need to do insurmountable. When you are faced with a tough challenge, go back to that experience that gives you perspective, and that will give you strength. Sharing some of my favorite words from Nelson Mandela. No one person is born hating another because of the color of his skin, his background, or his religion. People learn to hate, and if they learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Think about how you bring smiles, empathy, inclusion, and love to every day, and please don't put the brooms down.
I'm Pincus. I'm with the IICF. My boss, Betsy Maya, is having some technical difficulties, so I wanted to get on and ask a few questions of our speakers. I will start with Mia. Mia, is it best to speak up in the moment or bring a situation or comment you heard up either to HR or your superior later? I would welcome further insight on the best way to address the uncomfortable situation.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've learned in the course of my career that different situations require a different answer. So for example, I had a coworker one time who made a racially insensitive joke about my skin color, saying that the light was too dark in the room to see my dark skin. In that moment, it wasn't too emotional for me to speak up at the time.
Okay, we're having some technical difficulties. It looks like Mia is loading. I see Pascal. There's Mia. Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Not sure about everybody else, but we can
Great.
certainly give it a try here.
I'll start over and you guys just wave if I have any issues. I said, given the circumstance requires a different answer. There was a racially insensitive joke made at work one time, and a person said it was so dark that we needed more light in the room. I spoke up in that moment because I felt like it needed to be addressed in the moment. And I just said, hey, that's not cool. I find that really insensitive. I would appreciate if you don't make those comments. But I have had other situations, one where somebody who was my superior to me in the organization made a comment about me being a woman and me being a person of color and not having any upward mobility opportunities within the company. And that took me aback. I was very emotional about it. And I'm not a crier, but I felt teary-eyed. And so in that scenario, I decided to wait and not say anything in the moment, and to address it with my supervisor, who I was really close with at the time, later. So I would say that you have to kind of take an internal check. Is it something that you can calmly talk about, or is it something that is bringing up so much emotion for you that you need to take a pause and kind of gather your thoughts about how you want to address it? I like to be direct and go to the person that made the comment or statement and tell them how you feel about it. And then only if it's maybe ignored or repeated or kind of brushed off, you might want to go to a supervisor or even to HR about it. And so it does kind of require a case-by-case analysis and an internal emotional check to make that call.
Thank you, Mia. Okay, I'm going to move on to a question for Pascal. How might we encourage futurist thinking and methodologies, especially during extreme uncertainty and turmoil we're experiencing both personally and professionally now?
I think you want to start with acknowledging the fact that, particularly in these times, and I think what we are currently, of course, exploring is, to use a very overused term, unprecedented. But the notion is that we're living in a world, we used to live in a world where we had already a lot of uncertainty, ambiguity, disruption happening to us, and that has only accelerated at a truly astounding rate. And I think what the signs of futurists and the tool sets they're having can point us to is a set of tools, and I showed you one in the session, we can call it disruption map, but there's also scenario planning and many others, which allow you to look at the future, particularly in times where you don't have a lot of certainty, and create visions for the future and scenarios for the future, which you can then lean into and build for. And let me make one point, which is really important. I think I keep saying this. The important thing about the future is that the future is unwritten. The future is there is no future. There is a future we create and we choose to create. And I think you saw this today very nicely on this session. All the other speakers, all these wonderful women showed us that we are creating that future right here, right in this moment. And I think that's the power we're having. And again, the tool set of the futurists can help us get there probably a little bit easier and probably a bit quicker.
Thanks, Pascal. Okay, Jen, in the time of crisis, how do you ensure authenticity in your voice and messaging, your stance, while being cognizant of a corporate voice and message, and how that stance may differ or be more tempered than your own?
Yes. First of all, before I answer your question really quick, I saw a lot of questions or comments in the Q&A section about doing the work that I mentioned and looking for examples. And I just wanted to let everyone know that there will be a document that will get sent to everyone who participated today, coming from Cultivar and Megan Hodge, the CEO of Cultivar, that will have a ton of resources for you to get to work. So to answer your question, how do I draw the line between my own personal opinions and my company while I represent my company is, I think, what I understood your question to be. And I would say this, I recommend that if you're looking to join a company, that you vet your company out the same way that you would vet out a significant other or partner or a friend in your life. And you should be having conversations in advance with those companies that go far beyond what the duty of the role that you're applying for is, and take that up a level or 5 levels or however many levels, and ask questions about what is the culture of the company, what are the morals and ethical construct of the company, and what do the leaders who make the big decisions care about. And if you don't feel that those align with you, you should keep looking for another company. And I don't say that to sound callous, like it's so easy to get jobs everywhere, but you're going to go to work at least 40 hours a week. So you really should be working somewhere that you feel an alignment to. And so I would start by saying, ask those questions first. Assuming that maybe you're working at a company that you start to uncover that maybe there is some disconnects. My advice is you should use your voice. Mia said it beautifully, that every single person, no matter where you are, whether you're on the front line or you're in leadership, you personally, your voice matters and your voice can make a difference. And I have found that when we use our voice, that we're not usually the only ones doing it, and that the collective voices of employees within an organization can truly shift the opinions and in some cases, the value systems of companies themselves and of organizations. So start with asking the right questions before you join, if you have that ability to do. But if you're already part of the organization, start having those conversations. And Mia made a great point about just being courageous, right? Sometimes those conversations are difficult, but they need to be had. And there's no better time than today in this moment that we're living through to start having them.
Well said. Thank you. Lindy, finally your turn. I have a question for you. How have you balanced showing vulnerability and strength for your colleagues while personally working through change curve?
That's a great question. I think the first step is really recognizing as a leader that there's a change that makes you uncomfortable, and then take a minute to step back and process what it means to you before engaging others, because you really need to be strong for your team and you need to have a really good balance. So I'll give you an example. My former employer moved from these big palatial offices to a new work environment that no offices, completely open floor plan. And so the first thing I did was I confirmed, hey, is there anything I could do to change this outcome? No? Okay. So now I need to accept that is fact. And then I need to start processing. And, that was an interesting path for me, because I worked so hard for so many years to get that big corner office, and that meant something. And so I took time, I spoke with others outside my organization that have been great sounding boards for me, and that allowed me to process quicker. I was still mourning the loss of that, but I embraced the change that was coming. Only then was I able to be in a position to share with colleagues that, hey, this is non-negotiable. I have these feelings, and we need to embrace the change. It's coming, whether we want it or we don't. It'll be easier if we embrace it, and then let's sit and talk about it. And that sharing feelings makes it relatable, and gives that feeling that you're all in it together.
Thank you, Lindy. Well, I know everybody is short on time. I want to just circle back for one more question for each of you if we can. So anybody that's still with us, I'm going to go back to Mia. Mia, you talked about those that tend to complain instead of necessarily taking action. This can also result into a negative environment for others. Are there ways to encourage the complainers in a meaningful way to shift their perspectives and attitudes?
Absolutely. I find that complaints are typically just feedback that went unheard. And so they tend to just fester and it becomes a negative environment. And so if your organization encourages a requirement to give feedback, to ask opinions, about policies that are being implemented to open up the floor for comments at the end of meetings, you might hear some feedback that would have then otherwise turned into a complaint. Some other things that I've seen would be to have, an anonymous sort of comment section, whether it be online or something physical in the office where people can voice their concerns, or to send out periodic surveys. Our law firm will do that to kind of take the temperature of the attorneys and the employees that work for the company about various issues. When people feel heard and they feel like their concerns are being addressed, they're less likely to go office to office and complain about it. So just making sure that there's an open line of communication will promote that positive environment that you're looking for.
Thank you. I'm gonna skip down to my next question for Pascal, but before I do, I just want to ask you all who are speaking with me right now to mute your mics if you're not speaking. Just I'm seeing that there's a lot of feedback, so thank you for doing that. Pascal, how do we encourage a traditional industry like reinsurance or insurance to successfully adopt and apply radical thinking? Is it a top-down or bottom-up approach? In your experience, what behavior or actions resulted in success? What behaviors or actions resulted in failure?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And we need hours to unpack this, I think. But the very short version is we do work with the IICPA, the American Institute for CPAs, with their leadership team. So very similar, structurally very similar industry. And I think the short version of this is the following. Change needs to come from everyone inside of the organization. So I'm a huge advocate for organizations which empower the whole of the organization to bring the change. The challenge is that if you find yourself with leaders, particularly the top management, the owners of the company which resist that change, there's a German saying which says I was born in Germany, so there's a German saying which says der Fisch stinkt vom Kopf, which means the fish stinks from the head, something only Germans can say. But what they mean is that if the CEO isn't on board, it's just an uphill battle. And I think this goes very well to what Jen mentioned, as well as what Mia said about change, bringing change in the organization. Like if you find yourself in an organization where you feel like the upper management is resistant to it, unfortunately, I think it's a better choice for you personally to find a different employer instead of trying to fight against those systems. But change comes from everyone in the organization, and the best organizations embrace this on a big scale.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, Jen, as you shared, a significant focus throughout this period of crisis has been on making sure that your team's okay. Can you share an example of how you've done this?
Sure. I will give you the shortest answer, I think, of the day. Call them. Pick up the phone. Call them. Don't have any boundaries about who you call. Call everybody on your team. Anyone who's in your organization that reports up to you. If you're a leader, call them. Do a one-on-one. Have a casual conversation. If you're close enough, send them a text. Say, how are you? That's it. That's all you need to do. Call them and listen. Don't talk the whole time. Listen.
Thank you. It seems so obvious, but thank you.
Deep Thoughts by Jen Hayden.
It's so important. So thank you for telling us. So final question for Lindy as we wrap things up. Lindy, in a virtual world, how do you best identify those who may be struggling during times of crisis?
Yeah, just building on what Jen said, this is a great question. I would say in a crisis, not in a crisis, it's important to connect with your team and make it personal. Ask questions about their family, their pets, their likes and dislikes. Connect on a personal level. And then if you're in a time of crisis, or if you start connecting now, you'll start to pick up on subtle things. Somebody who is usually quiet might be talking an awful lot, and that might be because they're nervous. You might have somebody who's less engaged or responsive than they normally are. And so it's about the duty that we all have as leaders, as Jen said. I mean, you couldn't make it any more simple than that. Just call them And it's important to let them know that you care and that they're in an organization where they belong. And so, ask the questions, lean in, and listen.
Thank you. Wow. Well, I want to thank you all so much for chatting with our large group today. This was wonderful. We learned a lot. And I want to thank you as speakers. I want to thank our audience for sticking with us past the hour. This has been tremendous. And from everyone at IICF, I want to thank you all for being with us today. Have a great afternoon or morning, depending on where you are.
Thank you.